Suman Thiruvarur. My topic is portrayal of contrast between cultures in Babsi Sitwas and American Brat. Let me begin with my paper. Culture plays a main role in understanding the society around us. So the main object of this study is to show the contrast between two different culture and how the female protagonist of an American brat try to adapt to different culture. Both the culture presented in this work are different in terms of religion, language, geography, and rituals. Feroza Gindwala, a pampered and protected Pakistani young girl, is sent to America by her parents, hoping that it will soften her rigid character. Uh, when we first look at this character, she is very conservative. She was a very shy-natured girl. She was an antisocial child. She had a stubborn character. Both her both her parents worried more about Feroza because she is more and more backward every day. So they were in an effort to send her to America to get some Western girl part. So she was sent to America. Initially, the main character felt a cultural shock, but later she feels independent in the country where she traveled. Feroza remains to be there as a college student and she becomes a naturalized American citizen. She gets used to American freedoms. As a student, she feels being in America, she feels her home, land, and herself begin to alter. She even falls in love with the man, and she wanted to marry a Jewish American. When her parents know this, they really felt aghast. Feroza realizes how far she has come and wonders how much she has further to go. This novel is both a remarkably funny and an acute portrayal of America as seen through the eyes of the immigrant Feroza. Culture plays an important role in the life of Feroza. At first, her parents wanted Feroza to be a broad-minded person, but when she becomes broad-minded, they try to restrict it. As a protagonist, Feroza is portrayed as a young, independent woman who can take decisions in her own life, which she missed when she was in Pakistan. After being independent in America, her first thought was to enjoy the freedom she got. Later, she tries to adapt the culture of America, which she loves along. Thus, culture made her to choose her own path in life. At last, Feroza grows as an independent woman. Here, culture variation gives her power to raise her voice of herself. And here, feminism plays a major role in building her own worthiness and confidence. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a crispy
Yes.
presentation of how cultural studies, I would say, that has an effect, a feminism giving an feministic effect on the characters, and that helps in the upliftment of the characters of in the novel which you have discussed on. Thank you so much, Sangeeta. Next is Shanti Ranjan Singh.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible? Right, loud and clear?
Yes, a little bit more, Ranjan.
Okay. So, I'm Shanti Ranjan Singh from West Bengal. I am from Jadavpur University. I am doing MPhil research now. So, without spending much time in introducing myself, with due respect to Christy ma'am, I would like to introduce my topic. So, the title of my topic is Queer, Caste and Identity, Confronting Sexuality and Subalternity in Hasda Sobindra Shekhar's My Father's Garden. So, divided into three sections, lover, friend, and father, Hasda Sobindra Shekhar's novel My Father's Garden traverses through caste system, politics, and most specifically, sexuality and its multiple orientations. Set in Jharkhand, all three sections, especially the first two, lover and friend, introduce us to different contours of masculinities and their accompanying desires and alienations. Observation of sexuality in Shekhar's works is nothing new, but what is exclusive here is the depiction of homosexuality in a queer and its queer trajectories in a marginalized third world tribal society. So this paper seeks to examine the nuances of sexual identity, issues of queer representation, subaltern selves, and complexities of caste recognition in rural queer India. So to begin with, uh, if we talk about the invert relationships, so the story begins with the invert relationship, or here the male-male relationship that the characters nurture is the prime topic to discuss. A gay person is not necessarily a man who has sex with another man. A man could be gay if he has lifelong attraction to other men. Homosexuality is also a matter of choice, and it is anti-patriarchal choice. Sexual orientation is invisible, while gender is visible. This homosexuality is visible in many parts of the novel, sometimes in the character's speech and sometimes in their psyche. The invert role of the sex is sometimes so powerful that when the protagonist approaches Samir, or the main character of the story, for sexual favor for the first time, Samir reacted as, "No, no, boss, not right. We are both ladka or boys." And if we talk about the gendered experience next, there is a fundamental difference between gender and sex, as all we know. Within the field of gender studies, there are two other forms, like forms of criticism: gay criticism or lesbian criticism. That's also known to us.
One second, one second. Sorry for interfering in here. Is Christy ma'am?
Yes, Magesh. Magesh, I can hear you. You able to hear me?
Christy ma'am?
Yes, Magesh.
Ma'am?
Yes.
I just want to give, with your permission, could I give one instruction?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry for all of you. I couldn't join the beginning. A small instruction from organizing side. Um, we have more than 55 paper presenters, so I humbly request you to give your findings only. If you might have chosen a novel, you might have chosen a poetry or drama. We need not need the sum of the work. We need the findings of yours. We need what you have found.
Magesh, I have already told all these things, Magesh.
Sorry, ma'am. I was in the another meet,
No
so
problem.
couldn't.
I've already instructed the people only to give me the findings.
So,
Okay, ma'am.
so thank you, Christy ma'am, for explaining the instructions on my
Yeah,
behalf.
I've already.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
yeah. Thank you, Magesh.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So let's come to the findings, ma'am, directly. Confronting sexuality and subalternity. As might be expected, homosexuals have standardly been pictured as other and have served to define and confirm the heterosexuality of the center. Homosexuality has been considered as the normal sexual preference, while homosexuality has been so far seen as something abnormal or alien to the human civilization, instead of its presence from the beginning of the civilization. On the other hand, subaltern means colonized or oppressed subject whose voice has not been heard, or whose voice has been silenced. Now, these two major theoretical ideas are being intersect in this text, in this particular novel. When the subaltern characters like Samir, Lucky, Sunil, and even the anonymous narrator himself finds bear the characteristic features of homosexuality, they are subalterns not only in terms of their social backwardness, rather they are subalterns in terms of their subjugation and marginalization due to their inferior sexual preferences. They all belong to the certain backward communities, certain underdeveloped tribal areas. Still, they share common features of homosexuality. Their voice is also unheard, like that of the subalterns, when they attempt to convey their plight of being rejected by the society as sexual outcast. The gay characters or the homosexuals of the text put forward a deliberate and positive attempt to establish their preferences, but ultimately failed to even convey their choices to their parents only. It shows that there is no space for where the subaltern subject can speak. So that's all, ma'am. Over to you.
Welcome. That's a very challenging topic that you have taken, Ranjan, on LGBT literature, I would say, where here homosexuality is slightly coming up nowadays, but it's been considered, I would say, disgusting as it was earlier in the caste system of Dalit. You can even more people consider this to be an awkward or
Right.
I would say a disgusting thing,
Exactly.
where in European countries people started to accept. They have a LGBT committee, all that stuff. But my question is, do you think that this homosexuality goal, or can you consider them, okay, might be they are subaltern, will, even if they raise their voice, do you think that that will be heard when you compare it with Indian culture?
Right, ma'am. As you have told me, the answer lies in the question, ma'am. Actually, we live in a society like Indian society where all these things, the queer thing or gay sexuality or homosexuality that we call it, is a queer thing, or we can call it
A
something
strange one.
taboo. Yes, exactly, ma'am. Taboo. So there is not much scope that people will accept all these things in a free mind. And people here are so orthodox. I'm not actually blaming the people around here. I'm actually pointing out the truth of the society. The people are so orthodox here that they haven't even given the right voice to the women here, who are the half of the population of India. And now we are expecting the gay people or the lesbian people to speak their voices, and that is very what I can say unfortunate. And
Yeah, I think you can even talk about LGBT, that is LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual,
and transgender.
and transgender.
Yes,
People are not even considering transgender. I
transgender,
would say
exactly.
when you talk about bisexual, they will say a woman as a bitch, a
Yes,
prostitution they would compare. So
yes,
that
yes.
is long way to go, but it's very challenging, Ranjan. I would really appreciate you.
Okay.
Hats off to you because you have taken this. Because I have seen this LGBT community in UK where it's been people hand in hand go together. Where we were seeing, actually it was strange thing for me to see in buses or in trains, but it's very natural there. But you know, as an Indian, even me as a literature person, I find it awkward. But hats off to you, a very young man, and you have taken it very good. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you.
interesting, very
Yes,
interesting.
ma'am. And also the setting also is the tribal setting. The tribal people are also backward now. Like
Yeah,
they are
there are
also doubly
people
marginalized. Yes.
unknown wise. We know, we have seen it even in the film Fashion, where lesbian and gay has come, and they have very much pointed out that fashion industry has more gay and gay people. But hats off
Yes.
to you. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you, ma'am. Thank you.
Shakila. Shakila.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, good afternoon. I would like to share my screen, ma'am. I'm Mrs. Shakila, a research scholar doing in Rajeshwari Vedachalam Government Arts College. Today, my topic is the study of themes, ways, and motivations of women empowerment in Dalit feminism. So, synopsis of my topics is the introduction, the themes of women empowerment in feminism, the three ways of women empowerment in Dalit feminism, the three motivations of women empowerment in Dalit feminism, conclusion. So, introduction, Shudras. So, these Shudras are known as Dalit in those times. So, the Dalit, the word refers ground down, downtrodden or oppressed. So, the word Dalit was taken from Sanskrit word Dalita, which signifies a mistreated. So later, Mahatma Gandhiji, father of a nation, has given a name Harijans to Shudras, so which implies the individuals of gods. So the themes of a women empowerment in feminism is untouchables. So doing anything with the dead cows or cow hides was especially unclean for Hinduism. So gathering of drummers, these gathering of drummers who emerged in South India called Harijans were viewed as a distant in light of the fact that their drum huts were made of dairy animals cover up. So uncleanliness, according to Hindu and Buddhist divine beings, they were prohibited from numerous sports and exercises as appointed by their previous existences. So they after that they had taken so many movements for these oppressed people. So I had taken only 3 movements. The first one was taken by Naya. This movement is called as the Naya movement, which was started under the administration of C.V. Raman Pillai, K. Rama Krishna Pillai, and M. Batmanabha Pillai in 1861. So second movement is Shatya Shodak movement, started by Jyoti Rao Phule in 1873 in Maharashtra. So for liberation of low-standing untouchables and widows. So all these movements was taken for the oppressed people, those who are against for the oppressed people. The third movement, self-respective movement, started under the administration of E.V. Ramasamy Nayakar or Periyar in 1925. So he only introduced, after all these movements, he had introduced this Kudiyar Sujari was begun by Periyar in 1910. So what are the ways for women empowerment in Dalit feminism? So we can enhance, that means to enhance the self-help, bolted down pessimism, be straight and authentic. So then how to motivate this Dalit for empowerment, women empowerment. So that means each and every person, they should become that means a counselor. They should give some counseling for the people, those who are oppressed, those who are ignored. So turn into a counselor. So be a mentor is a great way to inspire young women. Next, combat against the Chauvinism. So compose some delegates, and I urge some other women to join in the battle of women privileges like that. Next, energize together to nearby women. We can work with them, and we can take some survey about them. Then motivations. To help them in 3 ways, that is shelter, education, placements. So the conclusion is to respect the resilient ladies, celebrate various sorts of magnificence, to engage women with graciousness, and urge women to make their desires a reality. So in an example, I would like to also state one example of Meena Kandasamy. She's a great writer, especially for Dalit feminism. Her work, a tool of political dissent, Miss Militancy and Detection, especially her second anthology, Miss Militancy, was published in 2010, is flavored with an experienced wisdom of the gendered and caste-based issues prevalent in society. So these poems portray the twice Dalit, also state of Dalit women. Thank you.
Shakila ma'am, can you give me previous 2 slides? Can you please show me the previous second slide? Second from last.
1 second. 1 second.
The next one, I think. Next one.
1 second. It's stuck in my mobile. Is
Okay, no problem. The thing is, are you doing a study?
Yes, ma'am. I'm doing the study, ma'am.
You're doing the field study, like, is it?
Yes, ma'am. I'm doing.
That's one. What kind of surveys
Yes,
would you
I'm
be
doing
taking?
PhD.
Yeah, what kind of surveys would you be taking for this? Enough. I don't want the slide. I got the question. What kind of surveys you would be doing for this study? Hello.
That means how this. Yes, ma'am. 1 second.
No, don't want the slide, Shakila ma'am. Enough. No problem.
Yes.
What kind of surveys? Because it's the thing is you were talking about people volunteering. So who would volunteer?
Yes, ma'am.
Because to empower the Dalit people, you have given your findings. That's a nice finding that we are talking about. So what kind of surveys you would take, and with that survey, how do you think that as will you be going along with an NGO, or would you do, because we cannot do it alone. You have to get along with some NGO or some institution. So what was your how would you take that survey, and how would you uh, carry out that work?
My voice is breaking. I'm not able to understand the
My voice
question.
is breaking. Ma'am, I'm asking you, you have given certain kind of findings like surveys. So what kind of surveys you will be taking? And will you be coordinating with any of the NGOs or any institutions to carry out your findings? Okay, Shakira, am I audible?
Yes,
Shakira,
ma'am.
but I think Shakila ma'am left. Okay, Shakira is there? Shakira, Shaumya,
Good afternoon, ma'am. Shall I start my presentation?
your name, ma'am?
Soumya, ma'am.
Okay, yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm R. Soumya from SPG College of Education. My topic is a study of feminism in Vicky Himara's The Veiled Rider. In this paper, I will present about what is feminism, about the writer Vicky Himara, and the story of the Veiled Rider. Feminism. As we all know what is feminism, the word feminism is derived from the word femina, which means women are having the qualities of females. The theory of feminism came out only for the reason to get equality of sexes, that is for getting the same social, political and economic rights as a man in the society. The earliest voice of feminism was given by Mary Wollstonecraft in her work, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, which was published in 1792. And in this work, she described about the role of woman and her responsibilities, and she also explained about the demands for getting the women's rights. The next work is Second Sex, which was written by Simon D. Beauvoir. In this, she mentioned about the women have been dominated by men by considering women as man's other. Kate Millett, in her work Sexual Politics, she used the word patriarchy, which became the standard vocabulary of the feminist writing. Virginia Woolf, in her work A Room of One's Own, she mentioned about the common needs of a woman that are denied by the man, and she also mentioned that the prime struggle is only for the money. Ellen Showalter, in her book A Literature of the Wound, she mentioned about the three phases. They are feminine phase, feminist phase, and female phase. She also coined the term gynocritics, which means the study of gynotics, that is, the books that are written by the woman. Vicky Himara, who is the author of the novel The Veiled Rider. He was born on 7th February 1944 in New Zealand. He was a novelist, short story writer, and occasional poet. Most of his works portray about the Maori culture in the modern New Zealand, and they focus on the problems of contemporary Maori society. His occasional poem is O Numi Tutler, which was written for the opening of British Museum. And this slide is about the novels and the awards of Vicky Himara. This slide is about the gist of the story The Veiled Rider. This slide is about my findings, that is feminism in Vicky Himara's The Veiled Rider. Feminism can be noted in the novel The Veiled Rider. First, throughout the novel, Kahu seeks affection and acceptance from Koro, but he rejects her. His rejection starts from her birth. When she was born, he said it is a girl, and she said it is no use to him. The family members named the baby Kahu after the name Kahu Chi Rangi. Koro rejected this name because it is the man's name and it is also the name of their ancestor. It is important to note that both Kahu
Can you please come to your conclusive statement?
Ma'am?
Your conclusive statement. I need only the findings and the statement.
Yes, ma'am, I'm doing the findings, ma'am.
Yeah.
It is important to note that Koro and Kahu resembles each other, but the only difference is she loves him, but he does not, because he does not want a girl. So he started searching boy child in the tribe for the new leader. Kahu's love remained the same, but Koro said, he also said Koro likes dog means she will bark like a dog. Koro started a school only for the boys in the tribe. He left Kahu, though he is the though she is his elder grandchild. Feminism can be seen in the words of Nani Flowers. When Porangri, that is the father of Kahu, had another girl child, Koro said another girl. For this, she mentioned that girls can do anything that they want. One day, Kahu came to Koro and put her hand upon him. Suddenly, Koro pushed her away. According to Kora Aparna, it is the waste of a time for a girl to get education in the university. For school breakup ceremony, Koro did not attend, and in that Kahu performed well and gave an speech about her grandfather and said that her only aim is to fulfill the wishes of her grandfather, that is Koro. The willpower of Kahu can be seen when Koro took young boys to the sea to check their endurance and leadership. He throws a stone and asks the boys to retrieve it, but the boys cannot build it. When Kahu was taken to the same place by Nani's class, he jumps into the and brings out the stone and placed it in the hands of a Nani class. Suddenly, she jumped. One second. Woman power can be seen through the words of Nani class. When the waves surrounded the village, she asked Koro that we are having hands to help you. But Koro rejected this by saying that he does not want the woman to interfere in the sacred work. Kahu became a fearless girl and moved toward the whale. With her courage, she started kicking the whale to move. After this, Rani Flask placed the stone in the hands of Koro. After this incident, Koro realized his mistake and blamed him for all and began to pray God to forgive him and asked Kahu to take the rightful place among them. When Kahu reached the shore, Koro said, Kahu is the best grandchild in the whole world. I conclude my presentation by saying that Maori society is patriarchal in nature and considers women as the weaker sex. And it has some stereotypes on the woman, but sometimes women took charges and came out more stronger than the man. One such incident is Nani Flask took the charge of burying the bird of Kahu, which was the task generally performed by the man. Then Kahu became the stronger woman than the other boys in the school in all activities, because she is the one who took the stone from the sea and she is the one who communicated with the whales. Even Koro cannot. And she became the first woman to protest against the stereotypes which placed women in the place of disadvantages for many years. Thank you.
Shakila, yes, sorry, Shakira, thank you. Soumya, thank you. And Sinega, yeah. Pygmalion, can you present now?
Yes, ma'am.
Shweta's there?
Shall I start my presentation, ma'am?
Yeah, Sinega, yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm R. Sneha, second BA English from Kaveri College for Women, Trichy. My topic is on feminism in George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion. The term feminism was derived from a Latin word femina and the French word feminism, which means women. Feminism refers to the sufferings, problems, power, status, and rights of women. It became popular by the movements of Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the United States and Emmeline Pankhurst in the United Kingdom of 20th century. It is for securing women from the sufferings. It spread over effect on the other socio-political movements for women's liberation from all kinds of cruelty by man. The women's movement was a renewal of old tradition of action and thoughts, which was already present in the classical books, which diagnoses the issues of women inequality in the society. Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of Rights of Women in 1972 described about the male writers like John Milton and Alexander Pope. Women's rights organizations insisted that females must have some formal equality in the civil society and law. The term femaleness alludes to the biological and physical difference between the man and the women. And the term femininity alludes to the qualities regarded as the characteristics of female, and the term feminism alludes to the promotion of female privileges on the ground of uniformity of the genders. The concept of feminism was the opportunity and balance of females And the portrayal of females in the literature was perhaps the main type of socialization, since it gives a good example which was demonstrated to males and females that consolidate the retentions of ladylike and genuine female objectives and aspiration. The term feminism gives a detailed account of political and cultural movements that target the equality of rights and legal protection of females in the society. And the feminist history was divided into three waves. Juliet, Michael, and Nancy, where the feminists explained about the feminine theory to know about the nature of femininity and masculinity and patriarchy. George Bernard Shaw, he was a prolific writer, he was a great dramatist, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1925. These are some works of G.B. Shaw, and the play is about Eliza Doolittle's struggle of freedom from the male-dominating character Henry Higgins and her father Alfred Doolittle. Feminism and George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion Way. Henry Higgins, who was a male-dominating character, he often insults Eliza Doolittle by saying that she was a slum girl. And he is very much energetic in his experiment of teaching by considering Eliza Doolittle as an inanimate object. And he orders Eliza Doolittle to be wrapped in a brown paper until her new clothes will come. His experiment of transferring Eliza Doolittle can be clearly seen through his conversation with Mrs. Pierce, who was the housekeeper of Higgins. And in the patriarchal society, Eliza Doolittle's father, Alfred Doolittle, has a total control over Eliza Doolittle's life. He felt that Eliza has a place with him since she is his girl and he has full authority over his girl's life. So he took advantage of her. And when he came to know about Eliza Doolittle's intent to learn English from Henry Higgins, he sold Eliza Doolittle to him for £5. Alfred Doolittle's activity of considering his little girl as a property can be seen through his argument with Henry Higgins. Henry Higgins also treated Eliza Doolittle as an object or property, so he gave money to Eliza Doolittle's father as a strategy of getting her since she will be helpful for him in the experiment. This made Henry Higgins dominate Eliza Doolittle because he brought Eliza Doolittle from her father and he thinks thereafter Eliza Doolittle belongs to him and he can do anything towards her. In Henry Higgins' home, Eliza Doolittle lives under his domination of him and he controls Eliza Doolittle by ordering anything he wants, and he saw her only as an object of his experiment. He made numerous number of orders of like
Shweta, I can understand what you're coming to tell. Can you please only answer this question so we can wind this up? So we know that Eliza Doolittle was purchased, I would say. Do you think?
Excuse me, ma'am.
How does? Yes.
Ma'am, Sneha, ma'am.
Sneha. Sneha, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm just asking you a small question. We can wind this up.
Yes,
Your
ma'am.
presentation was good. So actually, Eliza Doolittle was purchased for some money. So do you think, as a subaltern in that case, she was trained by she was very much goodly. She was very much trained to become a lady. So what kind of feminism does Bernard Shaw shows towards Eliza Doolittle? But this purchasing
The aim of the feminist movement is to get freedom, equal rights, and deciding authority. In the play Pygmalion, the feminist character Eliza Doolittle gains her freedom from the male-dominating character Henry Higgins, and started to fulfill her needs by opening a flower shop. And she learned good education with mannerism, and she can live her own life with her own desire.
Yes, I agree to that. But the purchasing of from Mr. Higgins purchased her. Do you think that is appropriate with the term feminism?
Yes, ma'am.
You think it's okay? Yeah. Okay. Fine. Thank you, Sneha.
Thank you.
Next is Shekhar Damuru.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Shekhar Damuru from Karnataka. I am a research scholar. My title of my paper is Migrant Experiences in Michelangelo in the Skanaf Lion and Anil's Coast. My paper addresses the migrant trauma, nostalgia, dislocation, and displacement in Michael Ondaatje's novels, such as In the Skin of Lion and Anil's Coast. It also addresses how Ondaatje mingles both fact and fictitious elements while exploring migrant experiences as a diasporic writer. This analysis is purely based on two novels, Diasporic Theory. So, Michael Ondaatje, as a Sri Lankan Canadian diasporic writer, has himself experienced transnational migration. That is why he is capable of explicitly expressing diasporic migration issues in his novels. In Anil's Coast, Anil Tesara, who is a protagonist of the novel, undergoes nostalgia, trauma, and dislocation. In The Skin of Lion, emphasizes mostly on migrant experiences, how migrants from different colonial countries have forcibly dragged in to build the major cities of Canada like Toronto. Therefore, Michael Ondaatje's works explicitly focus on migrant experiences which blend both fact and fictitious stories. So, both the terms diaspora and subaltern are related to one another because diaspora people experience migration, nostalgia, dislocation, displacement, trauma, rootlessness, and alienation as a result of separation from homeland and marginalization in the hostland, whereas subaltern people experience segregation because of their cultural and religious practices. After post-colonialism, people migrate voluntarily to fulfill their desires and economic prosperity or to meet their ends. In hostland, migrant people are ignored in all the fields because of their Western hegemonic dominance. These diasporic people who are marginalized are subalterns. Old diasporic people are surrendered to their colonial masters, whereas these modern or post-colonial diasporic people oppose, question, and recreate themselves as space. Post-colonial diasporic writers like Michael Ondaatje have started to write back in the novels to express marginalized voices of the subalterns. So the novels of Ondaatje, such as Anil's Coast and In the Skin of Lion, questions and express the voices of migrant and marginalized people through characters. The present paper explores migrant experiences like nostalgia, migration, dislocation, trauma, annihilation, subjugation, segregation of the diaspora people, and interprets the notion of the author also. The paper is analysis of two novels of Michael Ondaatje, such as Anil's Coast and In the Skin of Lion, from the perspective of diaspora. This paper also throws light on the experience of the dislocated and dispersed people. So, the Michael Ondaatje's In the Skin of Lion was published in 1987, which expresses his anxiety and sympathy towards the immigrant workers who construct Bloor Street Viaduct Bridge and a water filtration plant. History of migrant workers is not recorded in the archives and history books of construction of Toronto City. Immigrants in Canada are considered as subalterns and voiceless. The immigrants cross national boundaries of the other culture and considered as outsiders and slaves in the host land. Immigrants who migrated to Canada are Indians, Arabs, Armenians, Australians, Nigerians, New Zealanders, Macedonians, Finns, Greeks, and Italian workers. So,
Shekhar,
yeah,
can you please talk about the importance of shedding of skin in this novel, The Skin of Lion? What does the author mean of shedding of skin?
Shedding of skin. Madam, it usually refers to the pain and suffers of the migrated people, and this In the Skin of Lion title is taken from the epic Gilgamesh. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello? Yeah, ma'am.
I can hear you.
Yes, ma'am. So the title is taken from the epic Gilgamesh.
It means you were talking about that subaltern and diaspora together. I agree, but as an immigrant in Canada, what kind of identity they have to carry?
Madam,
it is talking about shedding of skin, transformation, and translations of identity. What kind of identity they had to have a translation or escalation?
Madam, they are considered as outsiders since they have come from other countries. So they were allowed only to work to construct the Toronto City or Viaduct Bridge in the history of construction of Toronto City, madam. So they are all the migrated people, and they are not given any. They are facing identity crisis in Canada, madam. So they are from New Zealanders, Indians, and there are many countries people. So since they are migrated, they are considered as outcast, subalterns, and voiceless. They were not given any voice to speak their own mother tongues because they were allowed to only speak English language, which is imposed to them because they were not allowed to speak their mother tongues. So they have the characters don't have any identity in the novel. They suffer from the identity crisis, as well as in the novel, Michael Ongeji blends both facts and fictitious stories, madam. Here, so the fact is that construction of Toronto City in Canada and the Viaduct Bridge and the water filtration plants. So this is the the fact, and there are also fictitious stories like he mingles many stories like Gilgamesh and Kipling stories, and so that's why come to the conclusion that he blends both fact and fictitious stories, and the character like Ambrose Snall also describes Ambrose Snall and the falling nun who falls from the bridge.
Yes, Shekhar, yes, Shekhar. Thank you, Shekhar. Thank you so much. I got your answer. Shweta?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you can start your presentation. Shekhar, thank you.
Okay, ma'am.
Hi everyone. This is Shweta, Assistant Professor, RA College for Women, Tiruvallur. Here to present my paper entitled A Study of Augusto Boal's Theatre of the Oppressed in the Street Plays of Safdar Hashmi's Halabol and Meshin. In this paper, I try to deeply analyze the subaltern perspective in the street plays of Hashmi's Halabol and Meshin with the device of Augusto Boal's Theatre of the Oppressed. Theatre of the Oppressed invites critical thinking by arousing the critical consciousness of the spectator. Augusto Boal was deeply triggered by the treatise of Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. For my convenience, I divided my paper into 2 chapters. Usually in traditional theatres, the actors wait for the audience to fill the seat, and eventually the audience also wait in a queue to get the ticket. Whereas in street theatre, there is no need to wait for the audience, or there is no need for the queue. This is where the theatre cracks down or smashes down the border between bourgeois, so-called middle class or upper class, and the oppressed society. The play Halabol and Meshin are enacted during the period when there is a drastic or dramatic difference between high class people and low class people, capitalist and exploited people. So hegemony plays a dominant role over here. The play in all try to make people realize their current oppressed situation consciously, and the play makes them to think critically, not emotionally. When we are emotionally moved, we fail to think critically. That is what the play signifies. According to Safdar Hashmi, whether the drama is performed in square, rectangular, or in circular spaces, as long as it expresses the sentiments of the oppressed people, it is called as people's theatre. That is the main reason why I have chosen the street plays, in order to prove the theory, Theatre of the Oppressed. In Theatre of the Oppressed, Boal developed a theatrical method based on Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Paulo Freire's method were revolt against the top-down approach of the elitist group. The theatre is a community-based education used as a tool for social change. Theatre invites critical thinking by arousing the critical consciousness of the spectator. It just triggers the consciousness of the spectator to think over their oppressed situation. Here, the theatre encourages the spectator to question rather than to sit quietly or to watch calmly. They invite the audience to act instead of watching. They invite the audience to analyze the situation they are being in rather than being patient. They want them to live for themselves instead of being for others. Instead of monologue, as what the traditional theatre usually does, Bowl focuses on dialogue. According to Bowl, the oppression is when a person is not given any chance to speak or dominated by monologue of others. So his aim is to make people speak out of their oppressive condition. One cannot liberate himself until they speak out of their inwardness. He wants the spectator to have a dual role. One is spectator, the other one is actor. So he divides the term spectator into two, spect-actor. So here the audience is watching as well as they have the full rights to give their own solution. They can get into the stage and they can give their solution or they can offer any issues. The audience are given chance to explore the issue and they have a full right to offer solution out of their irrationality. So here, from the play, the oppressed people try to catch the empowering idea proposed throughout the performances of the actors. Theatre itself is not revolutionary. It is a rehearsal for the revolution. Can the subaltern speak? I think the subaltern people are given chance in the street plays to come out of their inwardness, to come out of their subjugation, to come out of their dominance. Here, it throws light on how a spectator is changed from passive listener to an active participant. In order to sum up my paper, I would like to propose that the street theatre of Hashmi turned out to be the voice of the voiceless among the oppressed community. The paper brings into light how the ideological state apparatus, so-called theatre, deconstructs the ideology of the oppressor and decolonize the oppressed mindset of the people through passive resistance and finally liberates the oppressed as well as the oppressor from their repressive stipulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta. That was a nice presentation of the oppressor and the oppressed. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sabrin Javed. Sabrin Javed is here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sanjay Kumar.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Sanjay.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sanjay Kumar from Agra. I'm a research scholar from St. John's College, Agra, and I'm presenting a paper today, The Resilient Spirit of Mulkaz Anand's The Untouchable. The paper has been divided into 3 parts. In the very first part, I discuss about what is resilient and the effect, how does it affect a man's behavior. Along with it, I discuss about the chief protagonist, Baka. Baka is a very young boy, honest, brave, hardworking, and honest. So his day starts with his day starts with harsh calling of his father. His father calls every morning to him to go to his work. When he goes to cleans all the dirt of the people, he is humiliated and neglected by the people. So he thinks about the people, those who think like this about him. He cleans all the dirt of all the people, even though he is hated and neglected. It is beyond his thinking as to why society always abuses him. He reaches a point of utter despair and confusion. He recognizes the attempt of a higher caste to crush his spirit, and he even experiences a sense of defeat. Yet, like Santiago in Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, Baka is never destroyed. In the second part, I discuss about the thinking of Baka. He thinks like others people. He can also wear good clothes. He can go wherever he want, like others people, like in the temples, wherever he want to go. And he thinks he can wear good clothes also. But along with it, he thinks there are some people also in the society, they treat with him treat with him dignity. There is a character, Havaldar, who provided a hockey to Baka. So on that moment, he is very happy. So these are the characters in the findings. The sparks of hope come and go, causing great moments of uncertainty and confusion in the mind of Baka. But what may be observed throughout the series of unpleasant experiences that Baka encounter is his ability to bounce back each time with renewed energy, hope for change, and a brighter future. He does not allow himself to wallow too long in the uneasy circumstances that befall him, but rather looks to persons and situations that would possibly help him rise above all that is low and undesirable. His spirit remains unfailing. He stands with firm determination like the Himalaya mountain, which is withstand days of heavy rain or dangerous storm. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. Regarding Mulk Rajanand, Sashi Prabha.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Shashi Prabha is here?
Yes, ma'am. I'm here, ma'am.
Yes, present.
Present to all. My topic is Quiet Theory, Judith Butler's theory of gender as a performative in Jeanette Vincent's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. This paper attempts to examine concepts related to the quiet theory and its thematic centrality in Jeanette Winterson's novel, that is Oranges Are Not Only Fruit. So it was published in 1985. So it is a semi-autobiographical novel and it's narrated the story of an adopted girl. So it's significantly Jeanette. So who grew up less elucidate on the story of Jeanette's quest for fertility and homosexuality, but it rejects the traditional appropriation of the self by the masculine. So it's a type of a theory, it's most obvious example of a realist impulse and first conscious attempt to deconstructing the reality fiction and echo those of early feminism. So in terms of relationship between the mother and daughter. So Winterson concerns with the mother and daughter bond, and it's an indissoluble, passionate oppressiveness addresses to the is an issue that is central to the feminism as well as to queer. So it is a significant example of lesbian fiction also. So this novelist can be read as a Jeanette journey in trying to find herself and understand her own sexuality. So that is that. Then in this novel, the satirical criticism of religious fundamentalist discourse and their cruel method of manipulation and this treatment out of Jeanette. Jeanette Winterson. But this very cruel methods to repress her sexuality towards the end of the novel, in fact, her own perception of the self and her Wednesday celebrate the extents of same-sex desire. So clearly rejects sexuality and then that only of. So Orange is her mother. So she was adopted. Jeanette grew up with her extremely religious and mother. So is the right or wrong is in the family very straightforward. Her mother is straightforward. For example, they only eat oranges as a fruit because it's in her mother. So opinion is an orange is the only fruit. So he is very strict in the family. So this is a story about how Jeanette discovered that there are more fruits in the world also. So so more things people can believe in and more important. It's okay for people to eat other foods also. So it's believe in other things. in this book, it focuses out a lot of about her relationship with her mother, and always used to be the genius to see the world. Sometimes they see things in the same way, but with they have a different opinion. But her mother was a person she trusted and loved the most. In fact, the Jeanette discovered sexual identity. So that is that. One quoted in this novel, my mother had a painted white rose, right, and now she has climbed the grew the way. So this statement is really shows the complexity between her and her mom. So how she is treated in the different way. His opinion. This book is really reflecting Jeanette's observation of mother. So that is in the main theme of that is. Judith Butler's theory of gender as
I think it was a very nice presentation. Thank you, Shashi Prabha. Thank you so much. Next is Seema Devi.
Yes, I'm present here.
Yes, ma'am.
So my voice is clear, ma'am?
Yes, it's clear.
So first of all, good afternoon to all dignitaries and Trustee ma'am. And thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to present my paper on this platform. So the title of my paper is An Analytical Study of Modernized Regionality of Indian Myths in Amish Tripathi Shiv Trilogy. Regional literature is the greatest creation of Indian plethora and a live picture of old days myth of Ramayana, Mahabharata and other legendary heroes. It becomes more poignant when the native of any region value their languages and understand its culture with scientific explanation of facts. By learning and reading literary pieces from the regions, the power of the native tongue multiplies and intensifies the words that creates impacts on the soul. With the flow of time, regional myths were also modernized in literature and presented with an amalgamated picture perfect. New pop star of mythology and a flag holder of modern regionality, Amish Tripathi is emerging force in this field. His Shiva trilogy is a pack of wonder books that enwrap the modern day fire issues with the regional concepts of Lord Shiva and put the book market on fire. Various regional concepts of Indian society are dipped in color of rationality and presented with authentic ink. Caste system, Vikamas or untouchables, discrimination between rich and poor, outcast Nagas, political interest, puppet king, feministic ethics, Sura and Asura concepts, Ardhanarishwar and humanization of God are presented by him well. In Immortality of Meluha, The Secret of Nagas and the Oath of Vayuputras, a journey of Shiva is depicted, how he emerged as a man of high order and value. In present context, the social, cultural and political motives in Shiva trilogy are shown to be symbolic image of 21st century discourses, namely ethno-nationalism, climate change, counter-terrorism and nuclearization. Shiva's struggle in this trio of books against Somras is therefore multi-dimensional, as it includes opposition to the social, cultural and political conflicts caused by Somras. The readers in the 21st century are actually a post-modern humanity living in the ecosphere after the death of God. This is a term by Nietzsche. And to present a Puranic history of Shiva's life grounded on historical fact and scientific truth, he used cacophony of opinions. In doing so, and to revise and prehistoric measures, he reforms the contemporary gems of life such as terrorism, ecocide, war on terrorism, war on terror, and post-human strides of humanity. Here, the whole action of the novel revolves around the godly drink Somras, and it's evident in text that manufacturing of Somras requires massive amount of Saraswati water during processing, and its mass production in Meluha induces river depletion in the western sea and desertification of the land in the south of Rajasthan. Holding accountable Somras for the plight of Brangas and Naga people, Tripathi has contextualized the ecological destruction of Saraswati River in present day as a method of group destruction, drawing a link between ecocide and genocide. So here I'm just going towards the end of my paper. Image of Shiva in Amish Tripathi is not the same image of ash smeared, naked, trident bearer, desolate and introvert being, or a god who is easy to please and gives everything to his devotees. As a figure of to be afraid, or a linga which fulfill all desires, a mythical figure will all images that carries with it Ganga, snake. But here is a different Shiva. This Shiva is a livid god, the Mahadev, the god of gods. This Shiva is the destroyer of evil, and he is a quick wit accompanied by an equally quick and fearsome temper. He is overall a multifaceted personality. Like a man of flesh and blood, he also carries the burden of past on his shoulders, and it haunts him in nightmare. Lord Shiva, who has no past and has no story of origin, is a myth for world, is feeling heavy his shoulder in Amish Tripathi book, but at last relieves his burden by karma, as is said in Bhagavad Gita, Karmanye Vadhikaraste Ma Phaleshu Kadachane Ma Karamphal Hetur Bhuma Te Sango Asatu Karmani. So, despite having criticism of clunky languages and sloppy grammar, Amish was also acclaimed the best in his portrayal of all minute details related to the myths that present in India, in various parts of India. Somras is a drink of God in Indian mythology, and it is critically analyzed in reference to its after effect on Nagas and Vringas. It works as background for every evil, and when Shiva realized it, he vowed to take it out from equation and demolish it entirely. Amish took all mythological facts in root of his story and blended with it fantasy and knowledge of history. His family background of Banaras worked well here in blending of ancient and modern, even in the name of towns also, Kashmir, Takshila, Karchap, Lothal, Devgiri, etc. Malhuan tradition of, but the law cannot be broken, my lords, not even for you. This is a statement of Nandi. Proved Mahluha a Ram Raja, but it's Shiva who believes it's contrary, that some traditions are meant to be broken. Like a mythological lord of centuries ago, he uses marijuana to get rid
Ma'am,
of
can you
his
please
guilt.
conclude, ma'am? Conclude it,
Uh,
please.
okay, ma'am. Just I'm going to conclusion. So various regional myths in modern context are demystified and deconstructed significantly in this trio of book. An overabundance of countless mythological symbols is layered and demystified here as the symbol of Om, Nagas as his favorite people, importance of Saraswati river, his love for Kashi, his blue throat, Somras as poison, Trident, his invention, his obsession for Sati, his art of dancing and singing, his liking of raw milk, tiger skin as his garment, elephant head Ganesha, warrior Kartikeya, Parvati from Parvateshwar, and Kali as a fierce goddess. These glorious and modernized local myths are quick-wittingly used for evolving character of Shiva, and it shows his transformation from a mythical lord whose name cannot be uttered to a man whose action and decisions take goodness in equation and united this Sapt Sindhu in one and all compact state. Indian scriptures are abundantly filled with praise songs of Lord Shiva, and Amish Tripathi has aptly used it and transformed mythical image of Shiva totally. That's from my side, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Thanks.
We have to pronounce. Shanti. 1 second, sorry. Sabreen Javid.
Yes, ma'am.
Sabreen is there?
Yes, yes, good afternoon.
Yes, present it please faster.
Okay.
We are running out of time.
Okay, ma'am. Good afternoon. I'm Sabreen Javed, and today my paper is Sheikhul Alam's contribution to the mystic tradition of Kashmir. Let to introduce Sheikhul Alam or Nandreshi was one of the famous spiritual personalities of Kashmir who was bestowed with the number of appellations such as Alamdar, Sakhi Nuruddin, Sheikhul Alam. He is a household name in Kashmir and people remember him with reverence even now. Sheikhul Alam believed to be bestowed with the highest spiritual powers and played a pivotal role in awakening and educating and reforming the common masses of Kashmir. He played, he helped in evolving a spiritually and culturally uplifted society to the extent that the Afghan government, Raja Sikh Jivan Mal, nominated a renowned Persian scholar and a poet to write Alamdar's biography. The present paper will highlight Sheikh Alam as an epitome of spiritual and cultural ethos of Kashmir by using local vernacular language of Kashmir. The paper will bring forth how Sheikhul Alam paved way in understanding the mystic tradition of Kashmir through Kashmiri language. Sheikhul Alam is widely remembered across the valley of Kashmir because of his poetic expressions, which are wise and pithy sayings called shuks, rendered in the native Kashmiri language. These sayings are popular to the extent that people remember them by the heart. According to Malik, he states that Sheikh had a multidimensional personality and left an impression on every aspect of Kashmiri life and culture. As a saint and a rishi of uncommon purity and devotion, a poet of great caliber, and above all, the messenger of love, purification, and piety, his achievement is unparalleled. To quote his achievements, one of the famous saints of Hazrat Sheikh Habibullah Nawshari praises him as Nuruddin Rish Ast Mard Padshah Rishiyan Andarin Kashmir Kabrish Nek Darad Istihar Dar Riyaz Sunish Namad Kasi Dar Mulki Mast Chi Nishani Batinish Andar Kalami Khushgawa. To translate it is basically the Persian verse, and to translate it, he says Nuruddin Rishi is the king of rishis, and across the Vale of Kashmir is the mausoleum is his mausoleum famous. In meditation, could one name his equal in his land? For the symbol of inmost reflects in the pleasant verses. I'll briefly discuss about Sheikhul Alam's poetry in context with the mystic tradition. He had also a spiritual lineage with the Lal Arifa, Lal Det, and it is said that the mystic poetess Lal Arifa the Sheikh got his spiritual initiation from this mystic poetess and became the forerunner of the mystic tradition. Let me quote his poetic verses of Sheikh. He says that you might not be understanding the Kashmiri. I'll tell the translated portion. It was the Lalla of Padmanpur who drank in long draughts nectar divine, a beloved avatar. She was to us too. May thou, Lord, bestow a similar upon us. Sheikhul Alam was a child of extraordinary caliber. He therefore grew up the religious atmosphere in Kashmir, and when Islam entered the Kashmir and Rishidun continued to inspire the Kashmiri. So there are few mystical content which I am going to discuss very briefly, and the mystic content includes the theme of Tawheed, Nafs, Zikr, and among them I'll discuss few of them. He propounded the thought of monotheism, where he speaks about the Kuner, which we call the oneness and unity or nothingness. He says, if thou realize that I won, thy identity will come undone. Behold how the one shines gloriously bright. Thou canst not understand that intellect or mind. Whosoever has drunk the fathomless deep. These verses show that he had realized the transcendental nature of the absolute being. The verses testify the divine being is the only one, and there exists no question of duality. Then again he says, God's names are many, but God is one. No blade of grass, not remembering God is. No bird flies 14 days in sun. Without the help of one, even a fly is. So it talks of that even a single blade of grass is not without the zikr of Almighty. He is the only supreme being who is the giver of everything. Again, I like to speak some few themes. I don't. You might not be understanding them. I'll say. Shume nishi bet butas nishi metas nishi tarara nafai kundu me pardi panni dishi tarara. It means close be stood he and I by him. Relaxed felt I by his very side. Wrongly had I looked for him in the alien lands when I found solace with myself. And these verses speak that his heart was glued by the external world and other material needs. So he wanted this veil to be lifted by his strict adherence to the spiritual practices and attaining strict control on one's sense organs. And by observing the spiritual practices, the darkness had destroyed and truth was unveiled. He affirms that it was futile to find the truth in the alien lands that was hidden within one's own self. Sheikhul Alam had realized this unity and had transcended the dualities and all dualisms. Again, he says about the nafs, nafsi morus tovai, khatis rodum gate, athi yiham takyai, kartal senyas hate. It means, alas, I have been done for my ego, concealing himself in darkness. Could I catch hold of him? With the smiter would I slash his soul. So nafs is the part and the parcel of an ordinary human being. The desire to achieve the worldly positions has been the tendency of every individual. Since the birth of Adam, the lower self is a great obstacle in the union of the beloved. For an individual, it is very important to control oneself and shun all the base desires, as one cannot achieve the stage of subsistence till oneself is free from it. It is in this same context the poet is very much perturbed. He begins by saying the lower self of Nafs Amara has made his life like a hell, and time and again.
Can you please conclude, Sabrine?
Okay, ma'am.
I think it's more than 5 minutes.
Conclude, I'll just give an on whole what the paper discusses. The paper discusses the biographical account of the Sheikhul Alam, followed by the thematic analysis of the poem. Basically, this is the crux of my paper. I couldn't read my whole paper. That clearly shows his artistic excellence clothed in the mystic backdrop. This paper not only fully depicts the Sheikh's poetry and heavy loaded with the mystic strains, but also reveals his matchless artistic and spiritual merit, which paves a clear way to compare him with the other poets of great repute and acknowledgement. Thank you so much, ma'am.
I'm very much, very much touched with the Kashmiri culture that you have talked about. Thank you so much, Sabrine. It was
Thank you.
It was a nice, I would say, a different paper on mysticism. Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Shanti. Shanti is there?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am. You can present your paper, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I have opened. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. S.M. Shanti, Assistant Professor, RVG College, Chengalpet. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. My topic is the eternal feminine concept in Dr. K.R. Srinivasa Iyengar's saga and its relevance to the pandemic. I view pandemic as a force that has paralyzed the growth of the individual as well as the nations. It is an agent of a capitalist driven to hinder the progress of the nations in the race of economy. It has turned us voiceless and led us to isolation, alienation, and whatnot. It is a trauma both at the individual and at the collective level. One needs a special mental makeup to stand first, to fight next, and to evolve and to emerge successfully at the end. in this context, I bring in the concept of eternal feminine. What is eternal feminine? It is a term coined by the German writer Goethe. He defines it as the energy within that inspires us higher and higher. It is the inner strength. It is the eternal wisdom innate. It enables one to face and withstand any crisis. Saga dramatizes this concept through 7 mothers. The 7 mothers are Devahuti, Sukanya, Devayani, Damayanti, Draupadi, Renuka Devi, and Kannaki, all from Indian myths and epics. I have supported this with the psychological theories of Erik Erikson and Jung. They stress the importance of crisis for evolution. One should open up, face risks with total surrender to the self innate, to the inner strength within. The reward is a balanced personality, courage to fight, and the wisdom to win. The 7 mothers belonged to a royal family in their childhood, but marriage poses a challenge, a crisis. It is a situation where they were forced into with no other option. But within this limit and restrictions of social construct, they evolve. They do not forget their ambition. They adapt, stoop only to conquer. They rely on the inner strength. This inner strength is the message to the pandemic victims as well as any oppressed and suppressed, both at the individual as well as at the collective level. This is my finding. Thank you, ma'am, for the opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. That was a nice presentation, ma'am. Shivanandini? Shuhanya? Suganya?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Present a paper.
Yeah, ma'am. Let me present my PPT, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. Sorry for the technical issues. Am I audible now? Excuse me, ma'am.
You are audible. You are audible.
Yeah, ma'am. So, good afternoon, everyone. This is Suganya doing my PhD in IIT Vellore. So, the topic which I have chosen for today's presentation was marital entropy in Amelia Maladi's The Copenhagen Affair. So, the objective of the study is to explore the problems faced by women after their marriage. So, marital entropy. Marital entropy is the theory which I have applied to the study. So entropy is the second law of thermodynamics, which is related to physics. So entropy is the disorder in a system which will remain constant or increase by the time. So entropy are the disorder in a marriage which increases by the time. So in order to make something good, you need to give your effort constantly. So like that, a marriage needs your constant effort to live your life successfully. So I got the novel. The novel which I have to for the study is The Copenhagen Affair. The Copenhagen Affair is a novel about a couple who has married 2 decades ago, the Sonia and Harry, and they had a daughter named Sarah, who was 18. And Sonia is the protagonist of the novel, who was middle in her age, 40, and she is a working woman. As a working woman, she never fails to be a dutiful wife and lovable mother, and also she proves herself as a hard worker and at the same time, the only fault with her is she is very submissive. She is always very introvert. And Harry is the husband of Sonia. He's a great businessman and a handsome man. Every woman in the country tells that Sanya is blessed to having such a handsome man and great businessman. But the real truth is Harry is the first husband and a failed father. And we can compare Harry with Anita Desai's novels Cry the Peak of Gautama. So, like Gautama, Harry is always busy with his work. He never understands his wife. He treats her wife as a maid in the house. So, in that concept, we could come to know that Harry is such a corporate work. And the reasons for the marital entropy, as I said, entropy is the disorder in a system. So, what are the reasons for the marital entropy is has lack of attention and love, introvert Sanya, and infidelity of Harry. So, the first reason which makes Sanya more introvert is her company's rejection. Every woman needs a supportive husband, but when it comes to the working women, she needs extra support from her husband. So like that, Sanya expects her husband to support her when she was rejected for a company where she was working in a decade. But Harry fails to be a supportive husband when she called her to reveal the news of her fire. Harry asked everyone in the company whether she was raped by someone. In that moment, Sanya feels that because Sanya and Harry were married with love, but Sanya now asks the questions that where did it go? All the love, the mad for you, and the can't live without you kind. All this love was tenuous by the time. So then Sanya becomes more introvert and chooses sleep as to avoid people. And next one is acceptance. So in any relationship, acceptance is one of the most important things. In the marriage life, even husband and wife has to understand. But Harry fails to be accept Sanya. When Sanya was fired from the company, she became very introvert and she never had a company with anyone. And Harry totally ignored Sanya because she was not happy Sanya he had married. So he completely ignored her. That makes her more hurt. And next one is infidelity. So anyone cannot tolerate that infidelity in a marriage. So infidelity is the unfaithful in a relationship. When Sanya comes to know that Harry had 3 affairs in the 2 decades of their marriage, that was the turning point in Sanya's life. So that pays Sanya, that stimulates Sanya to have an affair or attachment with Anders Raven. So Anders Raven is the owner of the IT company. That company, which is going to purchase by Harry, but when Sanya was attached towards Anders Raven Singh, but she comes to know that he is like a kind of supportive man who was also depressed. So she comes to know that one damaged person helps other damaged person to heal. In that case, Sanya takes Anders Ravenson as her friend. So loyalty in marriage, loyalty is very important in the marriage. So Harry fails to prove his loyaltiness towards Sanya because he had 3 affairs in their 2 decades of marriage. But when it comes to Sanya still remains strong. She never takes Andrew Stuyvesant to extramarital affair. When Raven approaches Sanya that he is kidnapping Sanya like a Raman in Ramayana, but Sanya said that she is like Sita Devi, makes a circle around her to save herself and her virginity, and her honor. So in that case, we come to know that even though the man is cheating the women, man is cheating the wife, but Sanya remains loyal in their marriage and realization of Harry. So when Harry comes to know that Sanya is having an affair with Raven, he abruptly wants to reunite with Sanya, but Sanya needs some time to fix the damaged pieces. So in that case, Sanya said that I need to figure out who I am, and I need you to figure out who this new Harry is. So I need some extra time to fix ourselves. And the conclusion of this study is marital life is not a utopia to everyone. It needs extra care, attention, responsibility, and love to lead a successful life. And I would like to conclude my presentation with this method of failed marriage. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. So you are talking about an utopian marriage. So people tend to pretend they have an utopian kind of marriage. Actually, most of the houses, it talks about differences. A woman has to be like this, or a man has to be like this. It's been taught in our life itself. So you think to achieve this utopian kind of marriage, what kind of things has to be followed in the house, or is it a fantasy, or can to get to an utopian life? Is it a fairy tale, or is it a fantasy, or only it can be dreamt of? Can we achieve an utopian family?
I think the patriarchal society, the society where we are living is patriarchal society. From our childhood days, the women are practiced to be a better wife, never a better woman. In that case, men are taking advantage to cheat a wife, because as a man, I can do anything. Because I don't have any name called or I lost my virginity. But when it comes to women, the women are more pampered and more. They should have the virgin alone. This is the thing what the society teaches for us. So as you asked that, utopian marriage could be achieved by the understanding between the couples and by the acceptance and the reality of the
no, I see understanding of the couple. I'm telling an understanding does not arise when a person becomes 30. I'm asking you, how can that be the thought in the if for example when you are getting married, when you have child, would you train your child to get to an utopian lifestyle, or you would follow a patriarchal lifestyle?
Yes, ma'am. That's what I told, that it should be started from the house.
Yes.
Parents should take efforts to teach their children how a man should be, how a woman should be, how a man should treat the women, and how a woman should treat the men. So that is very important. So every beginning should start from the house itself.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So next is Surajit.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. And my topic is analyzing the atrocities on the marginalized Dalit women, a study of caste-gender interplay in Dalit women's autobiographies. Dalit women constitute the most unfortunate and deprived segment in Indian society, collectively suffering from the multitudes of discrimination, marginalizations, and atrocities in their quotidian existence. They are subjected to the brutal violence in myriad forms, such as rape, gang rape, sexual assault, and physical abuse, with the persistence of caste hierarchies playing a pivotal role in perpetuating such heinous crime against humanity. Dalit women face multiple vulnerabilities on account of their caste positions and gender identity, apart from their vulnerability in the material relations of society, both within and outside their communities. The paper examines such graded forms of violence committed upon Dalit women and the factors behind the perpetuation of such injustice and the cultural impunity that enjoyed by the culprits in society. As Dalit women are seen ritually impure and dirty beings, they are denied equality, freedom, and self-respect, thus making them prey to the Brahminical nature of caste oppression and gender violence. In a society that practices the notion of purity and pollutions, which is the guiding element of caste system in Hindu society, thus effectively undermining the autonomy and sexual freedom of Dalit women. The sexual subordinations of Dalit women constitutes the core agenda of caste hegemony and patriarchal manipulation as the caste hierarchies reinforce gender inequalities and perpetuate social fragmentation along the caste lines. The paper tries to locate and analyze the motives behind such atrocities committed against Dalit women as narrated and described in Dalit personal narratives extensively, and how such artistic endeavors attempt to sanitize our people who are very much tolerant of such heinous crimes. In the normative Hindu society, Dalit women are positions outside the caste system, and then they inherit a lots of disabilities and entitlement. In the elaborate text of Hindu Shastras, women are given the lower position along the Shudras, as they are ritually impure being and do not enjoy any social acceptance. They are doubly oppressed due to their caste and gender positions and face a multifaceted oppression and subordination from a society that practices social segregations. Such autobiographies foreground women-specific issues to the fore, absent in Dalit men's autobiographies, and express a candid view on the protection of female sexuality and bodily exploitation by the upper caste men. They reject all patriarchal notions that portray women negatively and highlight the sexist gauge they face in their everyday living in a caste-segregated society. They critique the male dominance in Hindu society and ridicule the caste-ascribed roles as enforced on Dalit women due to their caste and gender positions in Hindu society. But these autobiographies don't talk about the Dalit women as just mere victims of caste oppressions, but try to portray them as a pivotal agent of social transformations, like a talking subjects, not mere objects of study, bringing to an end to the gender violence and caste-based inequalities. Violence or atrocities in Dalit women is a recurring phenomenon in Indian society, and the role of Shastric interpretations in denying equality and justice is undeniable. The atrocities against Dalit women are instigated by caste animosity, and hence it would not be erroneous if one called such gender atrocities emanating from caste background of the victim. The very social location of Dalit women at the lowest rung of society and attaching the...
Sarojit, yes. Can you please conclude?
Yes,
it was a nice presentation. Can you please conclude?
Okay, ma'am. So actually, my intention is to showcase that just a single axis of gender will not suffice to understand the predicament or precarity of Dalit women's oppressions. We need an intersectional viewpoint, intersectional feministic viewpoint, which portray and position women at the intersectional point of caste, class, and gender, and how triple oppression affected Dalit women and deprived them subjectivity and autonomy in everyday living. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next is Surya.
Good
Surya?
afternoon, ma'am.
Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I'm Surya, from currently pursuing my first year UG in JP College of Arts and Science. Today, it's a great honor for me to present my paper in front of such dignitaries. My topic is that a thematic study on the O. Henry short story, Last Leaf in American Literature. I wish to present my presentation. I wish to share my screen. Ma'am, is it visible? Ma'am?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, ma'am. As the time constraints, I just giving my findings and bulletin points. Just 10 points I wish to share as my findings. So my topic is what I'm trying to convey is literature is by the people. As Abraham Lincoln stated, the definition of democracy as democracy is by the people, for the people, and of the people. According to me, the literature definition of literature also goes in the same way, that literature is by the people, of the people, and for the people. So the author knowingly or unknowingly, consciously or unconsciously, has left many life lessons through every literature, not only in particular subject, but in every literature the author leaves many life lessons, and this last leaf has also so many life lessons. I just give it in the bulletin points. So the first theme is, the major theme of the last leaf is love and hope. So the love and hope offered by our loved ones in the difficult situations of our life is the only medicine to get recovered from it, as that it provokes a thought that though not for us, at least for our loved ones, we had to survive and come out of the difficult situations, and it in turn solves the problem. So the second thing I wish to quote is, as Swami Vivekananda has already quoted in his Work and Its Secret, that strength is life and weakness is death. It's obvious from this work, because the Jhansi, who was affected by pneumonia, has lost her strength. She was weak and she was moving to death. But when she gained her strength, she started to survive. So Swami Vivekananda says that though there are 1,000 microbes around us, it won't affect us unless we are strong. If we are strong, it won't affect us. But if we are weak, a single microbe is enough to destroy us. So likewise, a single negativism, a negative thought, a single negativity can ruin our entire life. Then the third life lesson from the work is, being hopeful will change our life from bottom to top, and being hopeless will change our life from top to bottom. Because human mind, if you just dig out the psychology of human mind, it is very much associated with the circumstances and the atmosphere around it. If the atmosphere is around it's good, the human mind would function in a very enthusiastic way. Or as if the atmosphere is very pathetic, it would also, it has a deep connection with the mind, and the mind has deep connection with the body, and the body performs the action in what mind says, not actually mind says. So it's being hopeful is very important. In this story, the Jhansi is hopeless. Though her atmosphere is good, she become hopeless, and vice versa. Her it leads to downfall of her life. Then the thing is power of optimistic and pessimistic thinking. It is probably everyone knows about the power of optimistic and pessimistic thinking, as this is also portrayed in this work. And the fifth thing is, the only requirement to do a thing is willing to do a thing. Because as I'm telling this, because in this story, Jhansi's friend is Sue. She was trying every possible way to save her friend. He's thinking every possible way. So at last, she achieves it. And a character called Berman, he also he also wished to draw a masterpiece in his life. Throughout his life, he think of drawing a masterpiece, but at last he achieved it. So only thing required to do a thing is willing to do a thing. We have to willing to do a thing. Then the thing is, misconception of desire. Actually, many would say desire is the main reason for all despairs and problems in our life. But though it may be reason for despair, for problems, and it also the reason for our happiness. Only desire brings us happiness. It is misconcepted that desire is only reason for all problems, because in the story, John C. survived only when the desire of living is blossomed in her heart. So when she has the desire to live, her health improved, her health condition improved, her life was revived. So then the thing is, love makes life meaningful and beautiful. So here, love is the major theme that is presented by the author in this O. Henry story, Last Leaf, because the love of her friendship, the love of her friend Sue makes her life revived. Then the thing is, the life which we live is not owned by us. It is gifted by our nature, and we are here to be loved and to be loved. So I have quoted this because in this story, there is a famous dialogue from John C. that to think of a death is a sin. She considers thinking of a death is sin, because we are here by nature, and nature is our ownership is on our body's ownership is on.
Surya, can you conclude, please? Can you conclude?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Our body's ownership is in the hands of nature. So we are not responsible to ruin it by them ourselves. Then the 10th last point is, our life is possible on the hope rendered by our loved ones, and it will make us to think that at least for the sake of our loved ones, we would survive. So the desire is the thing which propels our life, and thereby concluding my point that literature is for the people. And thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Next is Vishnu Das.
Yes, thank you, Krishima. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Myself, Vishnu Das M, Assistant Professor of English, PMST Arts and Science College, University of Calicut, Kerala. And here goes my topic, O.V. Vijayan's The Legend of Ghazak, the depiction of social, religious, and political milieu. The work, The Legend of Ghazak or Ghazak and Idihasam, first serialized in a literary weekly and subsequently that published as a book in 1969. It still marks the highest point scaled by any Malayalam novelist in terms of intensity of vision and inventiveness of language. Before entering into the session, let me highlight the entire Malayalam literature has been shifted into two parts, pre-Ghazakian and post-Ghazakian, just after the publication of Ghazak and Idihasam or The Legend of Ghazak. It narrates how Ravi, the protagonist, who lands in Ghazak to set up a government school, is gradually circling into its archaic charm, its tales and vibrant ways of life. The Legends of Ghazak was written by O.V. Vijayan in Malayalam and was titled Ghazak and Idihasam. It was translated to English by the author himself. Ghazak is a story about Ravi, an undergraduate who takes up a job to teach in a village, and about a new world he experiences in Ghazak. It is set in Kerala in the middle of the 20th century. The book creates contrast of a modern world that meets tradition and the strangers that mix with the village locals. It explores the features of a marginalized society. Ghazak is portrayed as a village that embraces who come upon it and also frees them equally easily. O.V. Vijayan was inspired to write this novel based on Sasrak, a village in Palakkad in Kerala, where his sister was stationed as a school teacher. Much of the novel is formed through phenomenological reality, and though there is no continuous story of external incidents. The novel articulates a social world in a non-empirical way, often reminding the readers of 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Fantastically woven with legends and myths. N.V. Krishnavarya, that distinguished poet critic of Malayalam, makes the right comment on the book. He says the Legend of Ghazak is a meaningful turning point in the history of Malayalam fiction. Let me conclude. The Legend of Ghazak is full of dense and image of nature, old folk customs, evocations of caste differences, and the rich play of dialects. Vijayan offers a picture of small town wisdom and values. Readers can identify with the characters despite the fact that poverty, casteism, lack of education, myths of tribals, lifestyle, and beliefs of characters are marked by different from Western readers. And suffering from the guilt of incest, Ravi skips his examination and absconds from a world known to him, urban, westernized, and anglicized. And hereby I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My session has got over with Vishnu Das, and from Vishnu Priya, Dr. Shiva